first of all, in the area of food security, because of hunger, growing hunger and starvation and poverty. There is urgent need for developmental interventions to support African governments to produce food enough to feed our people, the increasing number of population. The other issue is national security. Increasingly, you find out that there are incidences of terrorism, cattle rustling, and the rest, which are issues that border on security. And most of the African governments do not have the wherewithal to fight these vices. And that will bring me to the issue that I bring on board in this Southern Voices Network, and that is the area of the potential that science, technology, and innovation has in fighting or in maintaining peace building or state building. And that is where the issue of science, technology, innovation in terms of communication, in terms of using mechanization and modern technologies to produce food, to fight against hunger coming. The other aspect that I see U.S.-Africa relationship to thrive is the area of energy. If we believe or accept that development is linked to energy, you will agree with me that most African governments do not have enough power to power energy to power their industries, even at the household level. You don't have energy for lighting. That is the commonest thing, and that's why some advocate for renewable energy, because it is proper and it can be used in areas where there is no national grid, where it is impossible to get the national grid into.
So, of course, there is particular issues with conflicts in Africa that determine a lot of the relationship between Africa and the United States. So we're talking about the emergence of conflicts in different parts of the continent, the role of terrorism in different parts of Africa. It's a big issue. But what I would say that it's probably the missing link in that relationship, and I think what actors like the United States needs to be a bit more clear about, is how do we avoid not only focusing on short-term immediate emergency responses and start working a bit more towards longer-term aspects of conflicts, which it's a bit harder to do, but it's certainly critical in terms of if we want to talk about sustainability of peace processes.
The key issues in the African relationship with the US is mainly the issue of having good governance and democracy. And we see American government doing a lot to support the African governance system to have good democracy. You have invested quite a lot in it, and we also feel there are some few challenges within that whole support system.
I think there are about 2 or 3 of them which I find very critical. One is the issue of trade, and I think the U.S. has been doing quite a bit on that, on the AGOA, giving preferential, treatment to African goods that are coming to the country. But I also think that you just don't look at the trade side, but you also look at the supply side. In other words, how are the African economies growing, and how are they really industrializing to be able to produce, processed products, things to move up the value chain, because we're still primarily commodity producers. So even if you are providing trade preferences to African countries on the trade side, you also need to look at the industrialization side and to support governments to build the capacity, both in government but also in the private sector, to be able to begin to grow the economies, in Africa. So this is very critical.
Well, I guess it depends on whether you are asking that question of Africans or of Americans. From the African point of view, I would say there are numerous things that Africans believe U.S. could assist them overcome. One of these key issues is resolution of the multiple conflicts that are occurring on the African continent. So ending of conflicts, reconciliation, peace building, and stability and security of ordinary people. Security being one of the key aspects of development. So then it goes into the next issue, and that is the question of economic development, so that as many Africans as possible participate in the development of their economies and livelihoods, particularly agriculture. Africa is a continent where majority of population spend most of their labor force in farming, and yet many communities are unable to produce enough to live on these farm products. So a lot of countries are become food importers over the last 30 years. And so there is issue of capacity there, capacity to produce more efficiently, to farm the land more efficiently, to increase the crop yield. So that is an area where collaboration with U.S. and Africa from scientific point of view, from human resource point of view, from input of capital and machinery, so that there is an agricultural revolution, the way it happened in Asia, so that there is food sufficiency and food security for the everyday citizen.
In some cultures that believe in the traditional system, where the king, for instance, or the leader of the religious group, like the imam, has the final say to legitimate a particular idea, you find out that the subjects tend to follow sheepishly, in quote, whatever that king or the imam, if it's a religious group, has given approval to. So this is what you need to understand, and that's what I was talking about, prioritization and local content. You must work with the people. One thing that I advocate is, if there is any intervention that will happen in any particular place, there should be inclusiveness in terms of working with the people on ground to identify common areas of solutions, than coming with a top-down solution to say, okay, it worked for this country with this tool or with this technology or with this innovation, it will work here. In that case, you will make a mistake, because the context of that particular country or scenario where it worked may be quite different from where you want to apply it. But if you involve the local people to, first of all, even have a voice in that's what we call local participation. Participate in the idea, help to identify the problem, prioritize it, identify what could be possible solutions together with you, then you will find out that it will become more sustainable, because if it's something that will involve resources, the local government or the national government can also invest. So it will not be now donor dependent all the time, or dependent on the U.S. support all the time. But if the people participate in developing that particular strategy, you will find that they have a voice, they have ownership, and they will be more comfortable to run with it. But if you just brought the solution and drop, yes, it may serve for the temporary period, but when you go, it goes with you.
I think there is particular global processes that the United States is already fairly active on, in terms of the UN peacebuilding architecture, peacekeeping operations, less from a deploying point of view, but in terms of policy support, the new deal for engagement on fragile states, and all of those processes are important. But I think there is a need to revamp those. Generally, we in the field, there is an increasing realization that peace building and engaging with post-conflict countries has not been fully effective. Countries like the US, with its own capacity, human resources, financial capacity, can really provide important support that is needed in Africa.
I think it would be very important for the American government to look at democracy within the context it is operating. In terms of democracy, is it only state democracy? Do we have the right people in the right places? Are we talking democracy, and do we have Democrats running these countries? We would also want to see the American government really putting a lot of resources in engaging with communities, engaging with the ordinary people, because they are the ones who would really be able to tell the kind of democracy they anticipate their governments to be engaging in.
I think that basically, the conversation should be around how you grow the economies better. But also, I think if you look at the Millennium Challenge account or the Millennium Challenge Corporation, they've set out quite a number of criteria, starting from governance issues, the rule of law, transparency, and all that. But we also need to look at how to support the institutions, to strengthen the institutions of government to coordinate and manage economic, development in the countries. In many of these countries, their strategic orientation is very weak. The medium or the long-term visions are not clear. And I think these are areas where, African countries can learn a lot, from the developed countries, and particularly the U.S., in how you move forward on those dimensions.
I think there is a question of the African voices in articulating what ails them, what are the priorities, and how to tackle them. Much of U.S. contribution to the solution of these problems I've just talked about is seen from the point of view of American experts. And there has been very little by way of actually engaging the African voices, so that U.S. decisions to support one area or another are built upon what Africans say, and less so about what American experts say. So I think that is the area where both Africans and Americans are complicit in mutual misunderstanding. One of the things that happen a lot of times in Africa is that African governments tend to downplay the capacity of their own people in favor of foreign expertise. And so if there is going to be a shift and good understanding of the ways to resolve African burning issues, I think there is a very important work that needs to be done to get African governments to give voice to their own people. There are many people within Africa who have the capacity to advise their governments, but they are usually overlooked in favor of foreigners.